Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Today I'm joined by Dr. Jim Taylor. Jim, welcome.
Great to be here, Dan.
I am so excited to have you on, sir. It's an honor, it's a pleasure. You're one of our most experienced sports psychologists, so really excited to be speaking to you. Before we get onto the topic of mental training, because I think that's largely what we're going to be talking about today, but I'm sure we'll go off in many directions. You've got a rich history in this area, so tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, first of all, I want to tell you that I appreciate everything you do. I follow you on LinkedIn, and I love your posts, and our approaches are very much aligned. So I enjoy reading your content. So a bit about me. It's a little uncomfortable. I don't like tooting my own horn, but you said I should tell people, so I'm just going to share the facts.
Fire away.
I've been involved in the psychology of sport for decades. I came to it as an elite athlete myself when I was young, because I was known as a head case. I was an alpine ski racer. I was a world-ranked alpine ski racer, and I was known as a head case. My head always got in the way. And back then, they didn't have sports psychologists. So I just sort of muddled through and took a summer college course and discovered psychology and sports psychology. And it turned my career around, my sports career. So basically, for the last many decades, I've been working with athletes at every level, from junior elites to collegiate, many professional and Olympic athletes. And as I mentioned, pat in the back, I had an Olympic gold medalist in Paris, which was very exciting and very fun and rewarding. And I tend toward individual sports because I'm an individual sport person, but I've also worked with various teams and national governing bodies. I've written 18 books. I've been the editor of 5 textbooks. My blog posts have been read by 10 million people, and I'm just giving you the facts. I'm not saying how great I am or anything. Writing is one of my passions.
Yeah.
Also on the athletic side, as I said, my interest in sports psychology came from my athletic experience. After becoming a moderately accomplished, by no means great alpine ski racer, I became a second-degree black belt in karate, sub 3-hour marathoner, Ironman triathlete. And my passion for the last 7-8 years after a long triathlon break is short course triathlon, where I'm pleased to say and amazed to say that I've become one of the best age group triathletes in the world, with 2 national championships and 3 times the world medalist. And for me, I enjoy just continuing to challenge myself athletically and to compete against the best and see how I stack up. And I will tell you for sure that there are guys who are ahead of me who I will never catch because they're genetic freaks. But it also enables me to practice what I preach. And that has value in helping me professionally because I'm sort of my own first guinea pig. And it also helps me have credibility with the athletes I work with because they know I've been there. And obviously not at the Olympic level, but certainly at the world level. And that really helps me, I think, make some deep connections with the athletes I work with because they seem to think that I get them, that I understand them.
All of that, and yet you were a head case.
And that's where it all began. And, there's a cliche that people become psychologists to figure themselves out. And that was clearly the case for me. And so when I got to college and I took a psychology class, the way I put it is that I didn't choose psychology, it chose me.
Mm.
And Mark Twain said, find something you love to do and you'll never work a day in your life. And I feel very fortunate. Retirement is not in my future because I still love helping people. I still love sharing ideas. And my mind, I don't think I've ever been as engaged intellectually as ever before. So I'm constantly learning new things from my clients.
Well, as I often say on the Sports Psych Show, I became a sports psychologist because of similar reasons, because of my golf game and the struggles I had mentally. So a very similar backstory. I'd love to start by reflecting on your experiences as an alpine ski racer, if I may, and just starting there with you as a head case. I mean, reflecting back, what kind of thoughts, emotions, feelings, distractions were hitting your mind and your nervous system when you were skiing that made you that head case?
Yeah, it's interesting because back then I didn't have a vocabulary for it. I was just a head case. And now obviously I can reflect back many years and label and really understand what I was experiencing. And one of the challenges was that I was very small. So I went to a boarding school in Vermont just for ski races called Berkman Academy, and it has a long, rich history of Olympians and Olympic gold medalists. And when I arrived there when I was 13 years old, I was 4'9", 89 pounds. No, so how do I translate that? 89 pounds is like I don't know, 50, like 40 kilos, something like that. And 4'9" is very short. And I had no right to aspire to be the best ski racer in the world, but I just loved it. I had a passion for it, but it was always a struggle.
Mm.
And being a little guy, I was always behind. There were always younger guys who were bigger than I was, and so I struggled with motivation. I was not initially a very hard worker until the summer when I was 16, and I had this epiphany, and I realized that if I was going to be as great a ski racer as I could be, I had to start working hard because I was not this natural physical beast. I was a very good athlete, but it was hidden in this very small body that didn't allow that athletic ability to come out. And so from that moment, when I was 16 during the summer, I have been and was through my ski racing career this incredibly committed, determined, hardworking, do anything I possibly can to be the best I can be person. And I will admit part of that was probably out of inadequacy, needing to prove myself. But certainly as I matured as a person, it shifted to just joy, passion, fulfillment, satisfaction, meaning, all those really sort of positive, what I call positive fuel that's propelled me forward both in my athletic life and my career. So motivation, I had very little confidence. I used to be so negative. I used to get really nervous. I couldn't focus. Basically, when I got in the starting gate of a ski race, I basically knew I was going to screw up. I knew I wasn't going to do well. I was my own worst enemy. And so one summer, I think I was 17 or maybe 18, I took the summer course related to sports psychology at a little college near my home. And it educated me about a lot of the things that we do with athletes: building confidence, motivating yourself, being positive, relaxing, all those standard mental training tools. And that next year, and the most powerful thing that changed for me was mental imagery, visualization. I used it all through that summer, all through that fall, and I had a breakout year the next year. I went from like top 40 in the nation to top 20. I made the U.S. ski team. I used to be unbelievably inconsistent, whereas all of a sudden I became incredibly consistent. Because what I found in my experience of the imagery back then, and it's still so vivid for me, I couldn't make it 3 or 4 gates in my head without falling. And if you know anything about ski racing, you go around these poles. So in my mind, you'd think, why, you can just picture anything you want, right? Wrong. Because imagery taps in your unconscious. And I had a fundamental lack of confidence, lack of belief in my ability to finish a slalom course fast. And that came out in my imagery. So it was this amazing journey of learning to control my images, rewiring my brain, getting myself to ski an entire course without falling, and then skiing it aggressively, then 2 runs. So far, and because I didn't make major changes in terms of my physical fitness, in terms of my ski technique, I attribute it almost entirely to the consistent imagery I used. And to this day with my athletes, to this day as a triathlete, I just got back from US Nationals where I was using imagery in the 2 weeks leading up to it, the day before, the morning of, et cetera, et cetera. In any case, so I struggled with many of the classic things that many athletes at every level, as you know, even at the professional level, struggle with. And mental training, sports psychology turned me around. So that next year, after all this, there was this amazing psychological change. Whereas in the past, when I got in the starting gate, I basically knew I was going to screw up. That year, when I got in the starting gate, I knew I was going to win. Now, I didn't win all the time. I wasn't that kind of skier. I was more like a top 5 kind of guy. But there was this amazing psychological and physiological transformation. And so that's when I got to college and I skied for the NCAA team and had a lot of success there. And I took psychology. It was like, this is my path. This is my journey.
And so the course you did at that time, you worked with yourself mentally off the back of that. You didn't have any professional guidance at all. It
None
was
whatsoever.
purely from the literature you were reading and you trying to put the building blocks in place around these different mental concepts. You were doing it yourself.
Yes, completely by myself, just from reading, from the lectures. You know, they didn't have the internet back then, so there wasn't this universe of information. But really, the basics of mental training aren't complicated. What's most important is simply commitment and consistency. Just like I use the metaphor, here's how I think about mental training. And I use the word mental training very intentionally because it's training the mind. And also, as you well know, sports psychology can carry some baggage with being associated with psychology, with being mentally ill, with being screwed up, needing to lie on a couch. I have a couch, but it's in my living room. It's not in my office. So I talk about mental training because athletes can relate to training. Because what I try to convince athletes of is the fact that mental training is just like physical training. And if you think about, Dan, what makes a physical conditioning program effective? First of all, it's effective. It's comprehensive. It covers all the different areas of physical performance: mobility, strength, power, endurance, et cetera, et cetera. Also, it's structured. You don't just go into the gym and do arm curls. You work all the body parts. Yep. Third, it's consistent. You don't just go into the gym every 3 weeks. You go in 5, 6, 7 days a week if you're committed. Also, it's personalized. And most importantly, effort has to be put in because, as you well know, you can have the greatest conditioning program in the world, but if you don't do it, if you don't stick to it, if you don't meet the goals, then you don't get stronger. So my first step when I work with athletes is to convince them that mental training is the exact same way. It needs to be comprehensive, structured, consistent, personalized, and effort needs to be put into it. Because another challenge with the mind is that it's like grabbing onto fog. Like if you take an athlete, you go into the gym, you put weight on the bar, you go onto the track, you got the clock, you put someone on a bike, you can measure their power. They can see it, they can touch it, they can measure it directly. It's easy for them to wrap their arms around and make this connection that if I work out, I get stronger. But the mind, as you well know, I'm still working on a USB port in the brain that someday will sort of directly measure a lot of these things. But I've only killed a couple of people. But I'm joking about that, of course. Anyway.
It sounds like you're Elon Musk's junior partner there.
Oh, please don't go there. Please don't go there.
I won't.
But yeah, the fact is that I try to make the mind tangible because athletes are doers. They don't want to talk about it. They want stuff to do to get better. So I give them stuff to do to get better. And another key part of this is I don't talk about mental skills. I don't believe in mental skills because for me, confidence isn't a skill. Motivation is a skill. It's a muscle. And of course, athletes can relate to muscles. Muscles can be weak, they can be strong, and they can be injured. And athletes don't wait to get injured physically to do physical training. They do physical training to prevent injury. And so the same thing with the mental side, to get them to strengthen, to train and exercise their mental muscles. And I have 5 mental muscles that I focus on. Motivation, confidence, intensity. Let me briefly explain that. A lot of people, when they think about intensity, they think of mental intensity, like super serious. Not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about physical intensity, this range of physiological activation. Somewhere between sleep, really low physical activation, and let's call that a 1, to 10, which is like super fired up, and then 15, which is sheer terror. and the 1 to 10 is what I call positive intensity. Somewhere between 1 and 10, depending upon your physiology and the sport you participate in, you're going to have your ideal level. There's no one ideal level of physical intensity for every athlete in every sport. And then if you get up to 11 to 15, that's when it's bad intensity. And that's anxiety, nerves, stress, whatever you want to call it.
That was me on the golf course, Jim.
Very good. Yeah, golf is the most psychological sport. It's an
It
amazing
can be.
sport.
It can be.
And so motivation, confidence, intensity, focus, obviously hugely important. Mindset. Now, I know you use mindset in one way. Carol Dweck uses mindset, the growth versus fixed mindset, in another way. I use it in a very different way because I haven't been able to come up with a better word than mindset. And for me, mindset is basically what's going through your mind. What are you thinking about before a competition? And you can have a calm mindset, an aggressive mindset, a confident mindset, or you can have a fearful, tentative, or cluttered mindset. And so the last muscle I work a lot with is emotions. And emotions for me, when I work with pros and Olympians, this is sort of the final piece of the puzzle, because emotions are ultimately what fuel us. And I use that metaphor, fuel, a lot with athletes. And they are also ultimately why we do it. If we didn't feel emotions towards something, if we didn't feel joy, pride, inspiration, excitement, passion, we wouldn't do it. And so getting athletes to get away from fear, frustration, anger, sadness, disappointment, despair, devastation. So many athletes, even at the highest level, are driven by these negative emotions. The problem is they work because obviously fear is a very powerful motivator. The problem is that what does it motivate you to do? To run away, to survive. And I bring evolution into all my work as well. If you happen to believe in evolution, that's a separate conversation. So, but bottom line is that training the mind is absolutely essential, and it has to be done the same way you approach physical training.
I'm going to reflect. I love this. I'm going to reflect back some of the things I've heard you say. Mental training is essential, as you've said there. It needs to be, commitment needs to be a part of it. It needs to be consistent. It needs to be comprehensive. It needs to be structured. Effort and commitment go hand in hand. I mean, that really resonates with me, and certainly in my day-to-day practice as well. And I reflect back on when in my golf career I saw some sports psychologists, and really, in many respects, when I reflect back, I think I was just ticking a box, because it was just very much, look at me, I'm so committed, I'm doing this, that, this, and this. I'm out on the range for 8 hours a day. Oh, and I'm going in the gym and I'm seeing a sports psychologist. But really, Jim, when I reflect back, I wasn't necessarily, and I suppose this comes to the next thing you said there, stuff to do. I wasn't doing stuff. I was seeing the sports psych. I was kind of doing some stuff, but I wasn't really doing stuff. And I'd love to unpack that, and I'm sure we'll unpack it with relation to these mental muscles, which, reflecting these back, motivation, confidence, intensity. I love. I know you felt you had to define it, but that is very much central to what I help athletes with. So motivation, confidence, intensity, focus. The last one, I'm sorry, is it mindset, or is it emotions, or is it sort of mindset / emotions?
No, it's mindset and then emotions. So it's six mental muscles. Apologize there. Yes.
Yeah. Six. No. All good. Mindset and emotion makes absolute inherent sense to me. I'd love to. Can we unpack those a little bit and have a conversation around those?
Yeah, let me make one more comment, because you said
please.
something that struck me.
Yeah.
You talked about when you're playing golf that you did mental stuff. Well, a lot of athletes do mental stuff. So they try to motivate themselves. They try to be positive. They try to relax. They try to focus. Mental stuff is not mental training any more than going into the gym every 3 weeks and doing arm curls. Yeah. That's not physical training.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's very much, that's where I liked you saying you have to have stuff to do, because I was working with a sports psych, and it was no fault of this sports psych. I just wasn't doing stuff. Simple as that. In my work, if I work with a golfer, I want them to do stuff on the practice ground. I want them to do stuff on the golf course. I want, even if we're speaking more sort of psycho-behaviorally here, I want them to engage in behaviors that relate to the mental aspects of the game. And if they're not doing that, that's demonstrable of actually not engaging in, as you would call it, mental training.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Motivation. I'd be interested for you to unpack a little bit around, your thoughts. I mean, you've already mentioned fear as a motivator. You reflect back on your skiing. You use maybe fear as a motivator early in your skiing career, and then later on, you were more oriented to what we might describe as positive psychologies, more towards the joy and the growth and the thriving side of things, flow, etc., etc. But yeah, please unpack motivation, stuff to do, how you might go around helping somebody motivate themselves in simple terms.
Yeah. So motivation is probably the most difficult aspect of what I do because I can
Yes.
give athletes things to do to build confidence. I can give them stuff to do to relax, like breathe, like relax your muscles and so on. But motivation, I can't give them stuff to do exactly to be motivated. And it's interesting because I often get calls from the parents of young athletes saying, my kids lost their motivation. You got to help them find their motivation. But I think they have it wrong because it's almost like they lost their motivation. Well, is it under their bed? Is it in their closet? Is it behind their desk? For me, that's rarely the issue because especially with sports are inherently motivating if the environment is healthy. So more often than not, it's not that they've lost their motion, like it's gone out of them. It's that it's being suppressed by something. And often with kid athletes, it's an overbearing parent, it's an abusive coach, things like that. But it's also very deep because I can give athletes things to do to motivate themselves today, like imagine themselves doing their workout and being really satisfied, or setting a goal, things like that. But ultimately, motivation has to come from within. And I use this metaphor of fuel that I referred to earlier, that emotions and the attitudes that trigger emotions are our fuel that propel us. And the goal in my work is to get athletes to run on 100% pure rocket fuel. And what I mean by that is having healthy attitudes, healthy perceptions, and healthy emotions. As I mentioned, joy, excitement, pride, inspiration, et cetera, et cetera. Too often, athletes, even at the highest level, are being propelled by what I call contaminated fuel. And these are the negative emotions: fear, frustration, anger, also perceptions like inadequacy, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy of love. Also attitudes like I have to be perfect. I can't lose, otherwise I will be a loser. Expectations, pressure, all these things are contaminated fuel. The problem is that they work for a while. So example, Dan, if you're a perfectionist, you're going to work mightily, maniacally to be perfect. Now, unless you're a robot, I suppose, or from another planet, if you're a human being, you can't achieve perfection. And so ultimately, that which drives perfectionists forward to become very successful ultimately holds them back. Because two reasons. At the heart of perfectionism is fear. And what's the fear? That I'm not perfect. And that's always tied in with fear of failure. If I fail, then my parents won't love me, my friends won't like me, it'll all have been a waste of time, I'll be a failure in everything. Also, perfectionists, because of that fear of failure, an inherent aspect, as you well know, Dan, of becoming the best you can be at anything is to take risks. I was just talking to this gold medalist that I worked with in Paris, and we're continuing to work together. She tends to not take risks in races. And so I told her, nobody ever became truly successful playing it safe. So an inherent aspect of becoming successful is taking risks. Another inherent aspect of risks is that they don't always work out. That's the nature of risks. It's a risk. So if you are afraid of not being perfect, if you're afraid of failing, and failure might result from taking a risk, you're probably not going to take the risk because you're not focusing on the upside. You're focusing on what might happen if. And with perfectionists, people with fear of failure, people with preoccupation with results, they're not really looking at success. They're looking over their shoulder at failure because they think failure is like a mountain lion. If it catches them, it will eat them. And so this is some of the contaminated fuel. And so a big part of my work, so basically I take two paths in my work. One is the mental training that I already talked about, and the other is the deeper stuff. And this is not clinical psychology. This is not mental illness. This is just life stuff. And it involves helping athletes understand what attitudes are holding them back. Because I've worked with many athletes who had pretty good, strong mental muscles, had trained them pretty well, but they go into a competition and they've already lost before they've even begun because they go in with the wrong attitudes. And so I use this metaphor of a weight vest. And I'll use triathlon's my passion, so I'll use this example because it applies very well to the swimming part. You're about to begin a triathlon, which starts with a swim, and somebody forces you to put on a 10-kilo weight vest. How do you feel? Heavy, weighed down. When you get in the water, what's going to happen? You're going to sink like a stone, Dan.
You certainly are.
and so a lot of my work is taking that weight vest off, freeing people so they're light, so they're liberated, so they're open. And so whatever ability they have, they can fully express it. And part of that process is getting them to let go of those unhealthy attitudes and perceptions and adapting healthy ones. For example, challenge, not threat.
Yep.
Process, not outcome. Progress, not comparison. So the list goes on, but this process of getting rid of the contaminated fuel. And let me say, Dan, realistically, as human beings, we all have contaminated fuel, and we're never going to get it all out unless maybe you're the Dalai Lama or something, or I assume maybe even he has anxiety sometimes. I don't know. But if you can run on 90 to 95% rocket fuel, that's good stuff. And so not only does this help athletes perform better, but one thing that I emphasize when I begin to work with an athlete is that I have 3 goals for them. One is to help them achieve their goals, because that's why they come to me. They have these goals and they're stuck and they've tried everything else. I totally honor that and support that. Second, though, is personal development. So everything we do, Dan, it's not golf psychology or triathlon psychology or sports psychology. It's life. So everything that we talk about doesn't just make them better athletes, it makes them better people. And a key goal for me is to help people become the best versions of themselves, because you can be a multi-million-dollar contracts, gold medals. And I've worked with some of these athletes. They are profoundly unhappy. And as somebody who's been on my own journey of my development, that's no way to go through life. Money, medals, attention, celebrity, it doesn't pay the bills. It doesn't pay the emotional bills. And so that goal is absolutely important, personal development. The final one, of course, is mental health. And this has been a really, really powerful period the last 10 years or so. As you well know, some very prominent athletes, Simone Biles, Naomi Osaka, Kevin Durant, Michael Phelps, the list goes on, have come forward and said, I'm struggling with my mental health. And this has been a real inflection point, both for the sports culture as well as for young athletes, because young athletes idolize these stars and they think they're superhuman. But you've worked with plenty of unbelievable athletes, as have I. And I think one thing you probably learned, as I have, is that they're as human as the rest of us. They struggle with the exact same things that we do. They just happen to have better genes. And so they have 7-foot genes instead of 5'9" genes, so they can play in the NBA, for example. And so if a young athlete looks at these star athletes and go, gosh, if they can struggle, maybe it's okay if I do too. If they can get help, maybe I can too. Also within our culture, as you well know, the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a much greater emphasis in professional teams, in all sports, national governing bodies, Olympic teams, on the mental health of their athletes. In universities, I'm sure you know, university sports in the U.S. is a huge part of our development system, both professionally and in Olympic sports. And so a lot of resources have been put into staffing, testing, evaluation, making sure that the athletes who are under the care, if you will, of professional and Olympic teams and university teams, their mental health is being prioritized above. I'm not going to say above winning, because unfortunately the almighty dollar still runs the show in sports. But there's more concern than there was a long time ago, where athletes used to be just sort of interchangeable parts who were just there, piece of meat to be used until they were no longer of use.
I've got so much to come back at you on with this. Let's. I don't know whether to put a pin in the mental health and come back to that or start here. So let's just briefly start here. So I'm asked a lot about mental health in sports. And my response to the openness that this generation has to talk about this kind of stuff is severalfold. The proliferation of information that is spread across the internet now, the normalization because others, very prominent athletes, are coming out. I mean, is this a generational thing? Do you think the internet has much to do with it? What do you think are the main factors here?
Yeah, I think in terms of a organizational level, like teams, they're worried about litigation.
Right.
And so again, the almighty dollar drives a lot of these
Yeah.
things, but that's okay as long as the end result is better support for the athletes. So I think from organizational level, that's a little bit mercenary, but that's the reality. I think that having athletes who are just willing to have the courage to come forward and say, I'm struggling.
Yeah.
And I think it becomes sort of a bit of a cascade where some come forward, then others go, gosh, it's okay to be human. And so there's an increasing openness. But I don't know if you find this, but still to this day, despite the fact that everybody will say that the mind is so important for athletic performance, that still relatively little is done about it.
Can I come straight back at you,
Yeah.
Jim, because you've hit a bit of a. This is a really interesting topic to me, and I'm speaking more and more about this. I think it's fantastic that mental health and well-being are up in lights across life in general, but in sport. Society is much more open now. And to speak to your point about organizations, especially in America, is that it's almost drip fed down in a healthy manner, because my understanding, and you would have a greater understanding than me on this landscape, but isn't it something like the NFL and the NBA mandate 12 hours a week or something like that? It's possibly more now, right? Because of the franchise system in America. That doesn't happen over here. It's organizations are very independent, but because of that mandate, the support is there. Because the support is there, it's normalized. Because it's normalized, more players, NFL, NBA, come out, talk about it. And even over here, we go on to X and other social media platforms, and very, very big, world famous players are saying, well, I experienced this and I experienced that. And so it's normalized over here more. And it's very much, say, our biggest sport over here is obviously football, soccer, and much more now that the side of mental health and well-being is the focus is on those. I think my concern as a sports psychologist is that the emphasis and the focus on mental health and well-being, as vitally important as that is distracting attention away from the other areas that we can impact as sports psychologists, to the point now where maybe organizations go, well, we'll just get a clinical psychologist in. There's some really, really good clinical psychologists who will do the world of good for players. But at the same time, I'm a sports psychologist. I have a set of skills and approaches that are useful on the training ground, on the practice court, and so on and so forth. I think we have problems in sports psychology if we don't sell our wares from the performance psychology perspective as well. And we can't be scared of that. We can't see that as skin deep. There's teamwork, there's leadership, there's the mental training side of things, there's skill acquisition and our influence there, there's coaching science and our influence there. I think we're getting a little bit timid in these areas and giving into the notion that we're just there for mental health and well-being, and that concerns me. Sorry, I'll get off my pedestal now.
Yeah, so I appreciate where you're coming from, and certainly in the U.S., from a purely economic efficiency standpoint, professional teams, Olympic teams, and university teams tend to hire people who are clinical sports psychologists, so they can cover both bases. At the same time, the fact is the presence of mental illness that requires clinical intervention is still relatively low.
Yeah.
and no different than the general population. And the fact is, again, using money as a motivator for sports organizations is that if the athletes can perform better, they will make more money for the teams. And so I think it's a bit of a balance. I haven't really thought in terms of clinicians taking away from the performance people, but I think there's a place for both. And I think that it's really important for the sport people. And I know a bunch of people who aren't trained in formal psychology, clinical psychology, who do amazing work,
Yeah.
and really understand athletes and can connect with them and can really help on the performance side. And so I think it's really just being clear about understanding what we can offer and where we can have the greatest impact.
I don't want to get stuck on this point because you've got so much rich stuff to talk about today, but that's what I'm essentially saying is I'm slightly concerned that very, very many coaches see themselves as the sports psychologist. Fine, they do psychology within their role. But for me, the conversations I'm having is they now only see psychology from a mental health and a well-being perspective, and they're ignoring the rich material out there around around your mental training, if you like. That's what concerns me. I certainly don't blame anybody, but I would like to see us push our wares better, not least because, I mean, to speak to your point, for me the incidence of mental ill health not only not different from the general population, you could also argue that maybe because I can't back this up with any research evidence, I would suggest that ill-being and mental ill health can be experienced in sports, especially professional sport, as a consequence of maladaptive mindsets, emotions, and thoughts around competition. And I think a performance psychologist is in a very good position to change narratives and meanings around that, which might then prevent the incidence of mental ill health.
Yeah, I agree completely, for sure. And I think one of the challenges with coaches is that, and this, I think this happens in organizations, is that a clinical psychologist can be this sort of separate entity that he doesn't really interact with the coaches very much. It's just to deal with the athletes one-on-one. Whereas coaches, they fancy themselves sports psychologists or mental coaches. And I'll be very frank, the best coaches are great intuitive psychologists.
Of course.
No doubt. That's what makes them good. And plus there's turf, there's ego involved. And so it's a balancing act, as you well know, when you work with an organization, of being collaborative with the coaches, not taking away their thunder, not taking away attention, not taking away time, and not taking away just credit, if you will. And so there's a lot of difficult challenges when working with an organization. And that's probably why I work mostly with individuals, because I don't have to deal with all the politics and egos. It's just like, and plus I can get really deep. I only work with a couple of, I work at max about 10 or 12 clients at a time, because I'm super committed and deep with them, and we build powerful relationships. Whereas if you work with an organization, as you know, like universities, they'll have, if they're lucky, 3 sports psychologists for 600 athletes.
Oh, it's unreal. Yeah.
How can you possibly provide comprehensive quality services to that many athletes? No. But they try, and I know a lot of them, and they do amazing work, but it's a numbers game there. It's just really difficult.
Talking about taking attention away from the important aspects, I want to get back to what you were saying, because I love everything that you were saying. And I just want to, I've used these 2 words a couple of minutes ago, and I want to use them again. Everything that you said to me about, you were unpacking motivation, but probably still taking a broad brush across all of your mental muscles. What really struck me was the importance of, at least this is my interpretation, narrative and meaning. The narrative we have around our performance and the meaning we make from that narrative. Even you were talking about risk, and obviously perfectionism and these attitudes, as you would call them. Our attitudes are often a product of the narrative we have about the world around us, and the meaning we create. So I'm probably not going to formulate a question, Jim, but I'm just reflecting back some things I hear, and I'm interpreting them in my language: narrative and meaning. And then the other thing that I love, you talk about rocket fuel and contaminated fuel. I really, really love that. And it just makes me think I'm kind of passionate about human behavior and human functioning being as a consequence of the biopsychosocial aspects of our world and life. And, you know, when you talk about rocket fuel and contaminated fuel, I think they're wonderful terms that makes us think about, you mentioned our environment, the psychological interpretation of our environment and how that impacts our biology, you know, the contamination of our biology, if you like, or what's going to rocket fuel our biology. So, as I say, no question, just narrative meaning, biopsychosocial. I love all those kind of things.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And like, I'm a word guy. And that writing is my passion. And for me,
Me too.
words are very powerful. So I'll hear people say, well, it's just a semantic difference. But for me, it's rarely semantic because words have power. They're the filter through which we interpret the world. And so it's important that the words we use are highly descriptive of what we're trying to communicate. So, like I said, I don't talk about mental skills because for me, they're not skills. They're mental tools, and we do mental training. I talk about focus, not concentration, because when most people think about concentration, they think of like narrowing onto one single thing. But if you're a football player, soccer player, you can't be focusing on one single thing. You have to focus on the field, on where the ball is, where your teammates are, where the defenders are, etc. And different sports have different demands. I don't use the word anxiety or arousal. I use the word intensity because intensity is positive connotations, whereas anxiety is bad. Arousal, you talk about arousal in front of kids, what do they think of? Sex, of course.
Yes.
And so I'm very careful about the words I use. And, you know, you talk about narrative and meaning. I talk about perception and attitude. So how do you perceive the situation? And your perception is filtered through attitude, culture, upbringing, your physiology, because ultimately we're physiological beings. So there's no such thing as mind-body dichotomy. You know, our mind is physiological. And probably if I'd gone into graduate school today, I'd be a neuropsychologist, because ultimately we're getting down to the wiring in the brain. Now, we're still a long ways away from that. So talking, understanding, insight, having the environment impact us still has a huge influence on how we think, how we feel, how we behave, and how we perform. But it's so important that making sure that their athletes are approaching competition, approaching their perceptions of themselves as an athlete with healthy, positive, constructive attitudes.
Well, we had Professor Lisa Feldman Barrett from Harvard University on a little bit of time ago now, and obviously she does some wonderful work around mind, body, and the creation of emotions, and how the body is always talking to the mind. Obviously, vice versa as well, but. No, I just think it's absolutely fascinating stuff. I'm keen to unpack some more of these mental muscles because I think what's so interesting is that you speak to so many different sports psychologists, and every single sports psychologist will have a different lens of the world and a different lens of each mental muscle. And also you draw on some commonalities as well, and there's certainly commonalities between us. I would like to unpack confidence because I had a good conversation with a British sports psychologist called Dr. Chris Shambrook for our 300th episode.
Yeah, no, Chris.
Yeah, okay. And we spoke a lot about confidence. But equally, Jim, I've had a few sports psychologists on the show talking about, well, you know, confidence, it's not tangible. It's something that can't be seen. And there's a little bit of, I find there's a little bit of skepticism, whether it's as a consequence of ACT, acceptance, commitment therapy, taking more of a prevalent role within sports psychology. I don't know, but confidence is certainly not a dirty word. I'm not saying that, but certainly there's sports psychs out there who kind of avoid bothering about it. But I'm interested that it's one of your mental muscles. It would be mine too. It is mine too. But I'm keen for you to speak a bit about that, really.
Yeah, I've never heard of skepticism about confidence because for me, confidence is the most important mental muscle.
Yeah.
Because you might have all the ability, all the fitness, all the capability to perform at a certain level. If you don't believe in that ability, you won't use that ability. And Henry Ford, Ford car automobile inventor, once said something like, if you think you can do something or you don't think you can do something, you're right. And so much of my work is about instilling that belief. Like, and in fact, just like believing that I can achieve my goals today. believing that I can perform at my highest level today. That belief is so important, because without that belief, you're not going to put it all out there. You're not going to throw yourself out in the field, the course, the court, the hill, whatever your venue is. So having that belief is so fundamental. Another interesting thing that I've been exploring with this one particular gold medalist, who's this amazing woman, is this idea of trust. So she's very confident in her capabilities based upon her training, her past history, what her coach's feedback says, or her data, her training data says, but she doesn't trust. And trust for me is like the deepest level of confidence. It's an emotional belief. Like, I just trust myself that my body will do what I've trained it to do, or I trust my program. So it's like she would talk about having these urges sometime where she needs to do more. And that's a lack of trust, because, oh my God, I'm not going to be ready. I'm not going to be fit enough for Paris. And so that confidence, I'm very active in giving athletes things to do. And I can share some of those with you.
Please.
To get stronger, to build your confidence, to make a stronger confidence. So the foundation of confidence is preparation. So one of my fundamental goals that I want with athletes is when they get to the line, to be, whether running onto the field or whatever the sport is, when they're about to begin a competition, for them to be able to say, I'm as prepared as I can be. Because ultimately, that's all you can do. The whole controllable, uncontrollables, a lot of stuff happens in sport, but all you can do is be as prepared as you can be when you toe the line. So preparation. And I have this thing called, I think of confidence as like a bank account. So let's say you want to buy something for 100 quid. So what do? You keep depositing money in your savings account until you've got 100 quid, then you can spend it. Same thing with confidence. Confidence bank. Every time an athlete does a workout, they get stronger, they get better technically, they eat well, they have a mental training session, whatever it might be, they need to make deposits. And so, yes, a big part of training is getting physically and technically and tactically better, but it's also building confidence in those things that you've gotten better at. So I have this thing called money in the bank, baby, money in the bank. So this is an exercise. So after every workout, every time they do something where they get better, they have to say, money in the bank, baby, money in the bank. And I've researched this for decades. It doesn't work unless you say baby. Because this is a deep acknowledgement of confidence that I have the capabilities. So that has to be like drilled in. So preparation is number one. Second is having a mental toolkit. So this is a metaphor that I use. And I don't know if you're a cyclist, and this works with cars too, but you're out for a bike ride and you get a flat. And if you don't have the tools to fix it, or you don't know how to use the tools, you're stuck on the side of the road. But if you have the tools, and then you know how to use the tools, you can fix the flat tire and get on your way. Well, as you well know, Dan, this is a metaphor. This is not cycling maintenance class. And sports and life are full of flat tires. So you need to have the tools to fix those flats. And you need to know how to use those tools. So what I help athletes develop is a mental toolkit. So if they start to have doubts, they pull out the positive self-talk tool. If they get nervous, pull out the relaxation tool. They get distracted, pull out the focus tool. And so having those tools makes athletes more confident, because they know they have what they need to keep themselves going. Even when they miss a shot and they start to go negative, it's like, no, come on, let's get positive here. And so that builds confidence. One of the most powerful ways to implicitly build confidence is by exposing yourself to adversity. Mm-hmm. And as an endurance athlete, a triathlete, I experience this all the time. Having to go out and ride my bike in the cold, to swim in rough water, to have to hills or headwinds, whatever it might be, whatever your sport has for adversity. I encourage athletes to expose themselves to it, because there's nothing more gratifying. There's nothing more money in the bank, baby, money in the bank, than having a hard workout or a tough race in really bad conditions, and you overcome it. And two things happen when you expose yourself to adversity on a regular basis. First, you figure out how to deal with it. So running into a headwind, you can't run at the same pace. You adjust your pace. You're being let's say soccer, you're being defended by somebody who's unbelievably good in some particular aspect of how they defend you. So through having a teammate that you go up against, in the same way, you figure out how to neutralize their advantage. So you develop the capacity to deal with that adversity in a competition. Plus, you build the belief, like, I'm experiencing this in a game or a race. Well, I dealt with this adversity in practice. So I know I have confidence that I can overcome it here. Because too often, especially with young athletes, but even at the highest level, when things get hard, top athletes, they're not going to fold, but they're going to back off a little bit. And at the highest level of sport, and this is the fascinating thing, as you well know, Dan, when you work with athletes who are at the top of their game, I can work with a young athlete and I can do anything, they'll get better because there's so much room to improve. But how do you take one of the top 5 female triathletes in the world and get them onto the top of the Olympic podium? We're talking small percentages, 0.5%. Races are won by 2 feet.
Yeah.
Shots are made or games are won or lost by inches. And so adversity is unbelievably powerful. What else? So support. So we're human. We have times when we have a bad game or a bad practice and the social media is attacking us. That's when we need to get confidence from the people around us. And as a young athlete, I remember those times. There was this one coach when everybody thought I was never going to be anything. And I would get discouraged. He would go, JT, that's what they called me back then, Jim, you can do this. So in a way, he was lending me some of his confidence. I believe in you. And that's the power of being a coach. Oh my gosh. Especially because athletes, even at the highest level, have bad games. They struggle. So whether it's a coach, teammates, hugely important in a team situation, family, friends, partner, whatever. Sometimes you just need a loan, a confidence loan, to get through the rough patch. I'm going to say the last one, although there are a multitude of tools out there to build confidence, is simply success. The ultimate validator of confidence is success. Because if you do all the other stuff and you're confident and you go out and play like crap, pardon my language, then your confidence goes nowhere. So success is basically, so I've got a reason why I should be confident. And so, but here's the thing. I've heard athletes say to me, I just need a good game to get my confidence back. I'm sorry, Dan, that's not going to happen because you can't have a good game until you have your confidence back. It's a chicken or the egg thing. But when I talk about success, I don't mean the big victory. I'm talking about successes every day. And this goes back to the money in the bank baby thing, where you can have a lot of little victories. Like, man, I just had a great practice. I just PR'd in my squat. I just had a great imagery session. Whatever it is, those are little victories. And what happens is take a couple little victories, increases confidence a little bit. A little more confidence, better performance. A little more confidence, and you get in this upward spiral until finally those little victories add up to the big victory.
I love everything you're saying, and putting my geeky sports psych cap on for a few minutes. As you're speaking, I'm making sense from a scientific perspective here, and I'm sure you'll agree, or maybe check and challenge me here, but a lot of what I've heard there sounds synonymous with, or could be underpinned scientifically by Albert Bandura's self-efficacy theory. The number one being a source being the past experiences. Money in the bank baby in many respects is checking in with the past experiences and just emotionally checking the experiences that you're building. Same with social support, swapped out for his verbal persuasion, but also social support. I think is interesting. You mentioned challenge and threat earlier. I believe the researchers are demonstrating that 4 sources of challenge and avoidance of threat, which is one of which is social support, the environment around you. I think what's really interesting and sort of my own musings here from my own writing is this idea of exposure to adversity, and I think this is fascinating and really drawing from, you mentioned evolutionary psychology. It was, in many respects, I look at confidence as approach behavior, the willingness and or the propensity to engage in approach behavior rather than avoidance behavior, if we're going to use kind of evolutionary psychology terms. And to meet your point, if someone is exposed to adversity, or you provide tough contextual priors, so tough scenarios in training that they then overcome and see themselves overcome, and you get them to engage in an approach manner, they're taking it on, their front foot, their energy forward, they're positive, purposeful, and proactive. I just think that to me is the definition of confidence. It's my own one. It's what I visually and see from a behavioral perspective, and it kind of neatly aligns with some of the things that you're saying.
Yeah, for sure. I said earlier how if I were in school today, I'd be a neuropsychologist, or I might become an evolutionary psychologist. And I talk about evolution all the time in my work, and not into any time sort of political sense, but just the fact is that I travel back in time with my clients all the time to the Serengeti 250,000 years ago. And Dan, before you think I'm nuts, we don't literally actually do that, but there's so much to be learned about us as evolutionary beings. Because think of it this way. So survival is our most powerful instinct. And we've spent the last 250 million years perfecting that mechanism since we climbed out of the primordial muck as reptiles. And it has served us incredibly well for for most of those 250,000 years, except really for the last couple of hundred.
Yes.
Because too often our evolutionary system, our survival instinct, our primitive brain doesn't know the difference between being faced by a rival tribesman with a big club on the Serengeti 250,000 years ago when he first became Homo sapiens, and I'm about to run onto the pitch and play a soccer game. It just senses my life is in danger. Now, yes, sadly, some athletes die in their sports, but relatively few. So physical death is not likely, but there's other kinds of death. There's psychological death, goals, self-identity, self-esteem. Every time somebody walks on to the field of play, it can become a life or death situation. And again, think about reaction, fight or flight. Are we more likely to survive if we flee some situation, threatening situation, or fight it? Flee, because as long as you keep distance between you and the thing that could eat you, you're going to live. Whereas if you fight, you might win, but you might not. So the natural tendency, and when athletes get nervous before a game or a race or a competition, that's their primitive brain thinking they're going to die, triggering their survival instinct, triggering fight or flight. And again, the way to bet is to run. Now, when I say run, I don't mean literally they run out of the stadium. What I mean, what happens is they perform tentatively, they perform safely, they're in protective mode. Why? Because when you're threatened, your first instinct is to protect yourself. So, for example, literally, if somebody's charging at you, you go like this. For the listeners, I just cross my arms in front of me to protect my body and my face. That's not going to help you have a successful performance out on the field of play. And so a lot of my work is about getting athletes to not feel the need to protect themselves. And ultimately, what are they protecting themselves from? Failure. But of course, when you protect yourself from failure, it actually increases your chances of failure. Because that protection worked on the Serengeti 250,000 years ago doesn't work in 2024, striving to become the best athlete you can be. So getting people to open up and take the risks. And I use this metaphor, and this is taking a sort of theoretical, not a theoretical, sort of a conceptual idea and making it tangible. So in order to perform your best, you have to open yourself up. What are you opening yourself up to? The possibility of failure. But when you also open yourself up, you open yourself up to possibility of success and opportunities. So what I have athletes do to make this more real is I will literally, before a competition, they will stand there and they will open their arms, and people can't see me listening to the podcast, but I'm standing here with my arms wide open. Now, this is a vulnerable situation to put yourself in. And let's think socially. Somebody's coming at you. You perceive that they're a threat. What do? You cross your hands in front of you, and then they stop. But if you open up your arms, they might hit you. That's possible, but also they might hug you because they just need a hug, and you've opened yourself up to the possibility of both. And that's the same metaphor competing. I'm opening myself because also when you open yourself up, well, when you close yourself off, when you protect yourself from outside threat, you're closing yourself off. You can't express yourself if you're closed off. So when you open yourself up, literally or metaphorically, you're giving yourself the opportunity to express everything that you have. And at the highest level of sport, when somebody's in protective mode, if they're a very skilled and well-prepared athlete, they're still going to perform at an incredibly high level. But will it get them to be the very best? No. You have to take all those natural capabilities and trained capabilities and create a mindset that and a physiology that allows you to let all of it out with reckless abandon, with commitment, courage, and confidence, not fear, doubt, worry, apprehension. All those things, all those negative emotions, all that contaminated fuel is just putting reins on you, using the horse metaphor. So much of my work is getting athletes to have their prefrontal cortex. And I talk about the prefrontal cortex all the time, executive functioning, the PFC. Mm-hmm. It's all about having the PFC override the primitive brain. Get it to realize you're not going to die. If you're an endurance athlete, obviously there are very strong physical demands. So the body the primitive brain's thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm out of breath. My heart's racing. I'm going to die. Because in the Serengeti 250,000 years ago, if they're in that physiological state, they're probably going to die because they're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. Rarely happens today. But the primitive brain gets this message. Oh my gosh. And there's been some great exercise physiology research. There's this theory called central governor theory, yes, that the primitive brain kicks in early that causes you to slow down. And so it's so important to have the prefrontal cortex, the PFC, override your primitive brain. And psychologically, to let go of all those fears. Because for most athletes, if they don't achieve their goals, they're probably going to be okay. Now, I know for some, their only way out of a very maybe poverty or something is to make it professionally or in Olympics or university. But most athletes, their life is literally not on the line. And if they can accept that they might fail and they'll be bummed out, they'll be disappointed, but I'll be okay, that liberates them because that's always what's holding them back. And so that's the last 0.5% or 1% that separates the gold medal from third or fifth or 10th.
It's fascinating stuff. And you mentioned central governor theory. Professor Tim Noakes, who introduced that to the world. I'd love to finish on your books. You've written 18. That's an incredible accomplishment. My question to you is this. What was your favorite to write and why? And whether it's that one or another one, what would captivate the audience about this book particularly?
Yeah, I guess it would be one of my most recent ones called Train Your Mind for Athletic Success. Because it came, I wrote it maybe in 2021 or so, I forget exactly when. But it basically encompasses my decades of experience. And so all my other books I wrote them based upon what I knew at the time. And some go back more than 20 years. But one thing that's great about getting older is gaining experience, gaining knowledge, gaining wisdom. And I don't want to say I'm a wise guy, although I'm a wise guy, but maybe not a wise guy. But being able to put my decades of experience in perspective and be able to create in this book, pretty much it's like everything I know. I knew everything. Let me rephrase everything I knew at the time about the psychology of sport, mental training, attitude, mindset, all these different areas. And so it covers this incredibly wide range of topics. And it also is very deep, because the fact is there is a deep part to sports psychology, to mental training. It's not just doing stuff. When I work with an athlete, and every athlete's not the right fit for me, and I feel so blessed that I attract a certain type of athlete, incredibly intelligent, motivated, open, curious, willingness to face their baggage. Because a lot of what holds athletes back is their emotional baggage, their past histories, attitudes, perceptions that are out of touch with current reality and that hold them back. And so in my book, as much as one can in a book, I go deep and explore not just how to make yourself stronger and better, but what's holding you back. Because so often the reason why athletes come to me is, yes, they're lacking some tools. They need to strengthen their mental muscles, but there's some fundamental unconscious forces. And I spend a lot of time with athletes on their unconscious, because unconscious forces like primitive instincts, emotional baggage, old mental habits. Simply, we ingrain ways of thinking and feeling and behaving based upon just sheer repetition, just like bad technique in a sport. And uncovering, excavating a lot of that stuff and making the unconscious conscious. And by doing that, once it's conscious, then people can engage their PFC, the prefrontal cortex, and make choices about how they want to perceive the world and what attitudes they want to approach the world with. And before you jump in, one last metaphor that I use, this again, very powerful, is forks in the road. Sports and life are full of forks in the road. Bad road, good road. Now, nobody chooses to go down a bad road. It is almost always comes from those unconscious forces. But unfortunately, people stay in a bad road, even though at some point they realize it's a bad road, because they don't see the good road. They don't know how to get on the good road. They don't even see the fork in the road. So a lot of my work is showing people that there is a good road and why it's a good road, and showing them how to engage their prefrontal cortex to make deliberate choices about which road to take. Until after a while, the bad road gets sort of overgrown and weeded over, so you don't even see it anymore. So they just naturally take the good road. But of course, life is full of forks in the road. So they're always going to be faced with bad roads that they're pulled down. So having that capacity to change the way they think, their emotional experience, their behavior, and ultimately their performances on the field, I'm trying to make it a choice. Because so many athletes, they come to me, it's like, I just keep doing this and I have no idea what it is or why. And I help them understand. I help them develop a vocabulary. I help them understand why they're going down the bad road. And I show them how to take the good road. Then it's up to them. Because the way I put it is that taking the good road is a simple but not easy choice. It's simple because would you rather take the bad road or the good road? Duh, of course you want to take the good road. It's not easy because those unconscious forces keep pulling us down the bad road. But the more you take the good road, it's self-reinforcing. The more you take it, the better it feels, the better outcomes you have. The next time it's like, I'm taking the freaking good road this time.
Love it, Jim.
Sorry, I went on a rant there.
No, brilliant. It's a good road rant.
I appreciate that. It's fun. I'm very passionate about it.
Absolutely. I can't thank you enough for this. It's been absolutely fascinating. How can people find you, follow you, and get in touch?
Sure. They have this thing called the internet now. You probably heard of it, and I have a website.
I'm only occasionally on that.
Right. drjimtaylor.com, Dr. Jim Taylor. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and Twitter. Haven't got to TikTok at this point. I don't think I will. But people can follow me there. If you go to my website, I've got probably 95% of everything I've ever written is on there. If you go to my blog, and I have all these different categories on my blog with literally thousands of articles I've written over the years, and it's all free. If you want to buy one of my books, if you want to reach out to me about working together, I'm open to that. But I don't do what I do to make money, although I need to support my family. I do what I do. I think same with you, Dan, is because I have just a tremendous passion to support and help people. And because like with my writing, like I can't not write. If I get an idea, I can't not write about it because it would be inauthentic to who I am. And so I just love getting ideas out there that people might value.
Fantastic. Jim, thank you so much for today.
My great pleasure. Dan, one of the great joys I have is being able to talk shop with people who are equally passionate about sports and other aspects of life. And you are one of those people. So I'm so glad we've connected, and I am sure we will be connecting in the future.
Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you. Well, everyone, I really enjoyed that episode, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, think. So please do get in touch via X or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.